All right. So now that we have worked a lot again on reviewing demand and supply and quantity demanded and quantity supplied and elasticities, let's now move to, again, welfare analysis and market equilibrium analysis. So the first 8 questions refer to a scenario where we have an inverse demand function, which is P equals 8 minus Q. So let's draw that. So it starts at 8, slope 1, so it intersects at 8. And we have a demand function which starts at inverse supply function, which starts at 2 and has a positive slope of 1. So it starts here. Okay. Yeah, won't do it. Let's try the pen. So it's 2 slope. Okay. Okay, so this is our demand. Different color though, but we can change that. Okay, and now they look the same. So what is the equilibrium price? So we just have to basically look at the graph. Well, the equilibrium price is 5. What's the equilibrium quantity? Well, that's 3. What is the quantity demanded in the equilibrium? Well, the quantity demanded in the equilibrium is 3. Quantity supplied is also 3 because it's an equilibrium. And the quantity turned over is also 3. How big is consumer surplus? So consumer surplus would be this triangle here. I don't know if this lets me draw it, but it would be this triangle. And that area is base is 3. Let's make it green like we always did. And let's also make it a little bit more transparent. So this area is obviously 4.5. How big is producer surplus? Well, producer surplus is now this area. And let's make that blue. Which is also 4.5. So total surplus is obviously 9. Okay, so that was pretty easy. So now let's take a look at the next one. So again, we have an inverse demand function, which is from 8 minus Q. So again, it goes from 8 to 8. But now the supply function has only a slope of 0.5. reason. Okay, now we have to draw it again by hand. Draw. So it starts at 2, but has a slope of only 0.5. So in this case, what is the equilibrium price? So the equilibrium price is now 4. Equilibrium price is 4. Equilibrium quantity also 4. Equilibrium demanded, it's 4. Equilibrium supply, quantity supplied in equilibrium is 4, and the quantity turned over is 4. So now consumer surplus. So now our consumer surplus is a little bit bigger. It's this area. And this area, base 4, height 4, 4 times 4, 16, over 2, 8. How big is producer surplus? So consumer surplus is this area here now. I gotta flip it around. And turn it a little bit. So this area is base times 2. Base is 2. Height is 2, base is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So producer surplus is 8 over 2, which is 4. 2 times 4 is 8 over 2. So total surplus is 12. 8 plus 4. Okay, so that was pretty easy. So let's have another one. Again, demand is 8 minus Q. So the slope is -1. But now we have a supply function, which is a horizontal line. It starts at 2, has no slope. So this is the supply. So the equilibrium price is now 2. What is the equilibrium quantity? That's 6. What is the quantity demanded in the equilibrium? Well, that's also 6. What's the quantity supplied? That's also 6. Quantity turned over, also 6. How big is consumer surplus? So now consumer surplus is this triangle. And now we can see that there is no producer surplus. So, but consumer surplus is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the height, base 6. 6 times 6, 36 over 2, 18. Producer surplus, there is no gap between the equilibrium price and anything above the supply function, so producer surplus is 0. And all welfare accrues to the consumers, which is 18. So total surplus is 18. Okay, so now let's discuss a price floor. So let's draw the demand function. It goes from 8 with a slope of -1, so it looks like this. 2 plus Q, inverse supply. Okay. So now the government sets a price floor of 6, so that's a minimum price. That's the price floor. So now what's the quantity demanded at a price of 6? Well, at the price of 6, quantity demanded is only 2. But the quantity supplied is 4. So the price of 6. So we have excess supply. So if that were a labor market, we would call that excess supply unemployment. So what is the quantity turned over in that market? Quantity sold. So that is only the quantity of 2. So the quantity turned over is only 2. So that means we also need to conduct our welfare analysis to a quantity of 2. How big is producer surplus? Okay, so now producer surplus is a combination of, let me see if I can get our old colors at least. So I just outline it. So consumer surplus is this area here, that's producer surplus. And you can see this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have a triangle, so that is 6. So this area, this blue area is 6. How big is total surplus? Oh, I forgot, there is also the consumer surplus. And produced consumer surplus is obviously this area here, which is 2. So total welfare is 2 plus 6, which is 8, or total surplus. So now what is the deadweight loss? Well, the deadweight loss is, so this area here, that used to be consumer surplus, because in the market equilibrium, the quantity turned over was 3, so there were more opportunities for mutually beneficial exchange. And this lower triangle used to be producer surplus, but that's now all lost. So this triangle is a deadweight loss of 1. So now compared to the free market equilibrium, how much consumer surplus do consumers lose? Well, at the market equilibrium, we have to look again at 5. So in the market equilibrium, at this point, consumer surplus was 1 to 2.5 units higher. So they lost 2.5. So they dropped from 4.5 to 2. Compared to the free market equilibrium, how much do producers win? Well, in the market equilibrium, the producers also had 4.5, but now they get 6, so they gain 1.5. So therefore, we must have a deadweight loss of 1 if one gains only 1.5, but the other group loses 2.5. There's a net loss of 1, so the deadweight loss of 1. Okay, another scenario. So now we have a price ceiling. Okay, so let's draw the inverse demand, 8 minus Q. Two plus Q. Okay, but now we have a price ceiling at 3. Oh, that will be an interesting case. Okay, so what is the quantity demanded at 3? Quantity demanded is 5. Quantity supplied, however, is only 1. What is that quantity turned over? It's again only 1. So now we have to conduct our welfare analysis to a quantity of 1. Okay, so now we can see we have only this super small area here, which is producer surplus, which is 0.5. And the producer surplus is 0.5. And the area on top of it, so the green area, this area is 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a little half. So producer surplus is also only is 4.5. So that is the same producer surplus than what they had under the market equilibrium. Because at the price of 5, if you remember, we have the same producer surplus. So this illustrates a little bit how stupid, and I don't want to insult anyone, but how bad economic and public policy can become. So how big is total surplus? Now it is only 5, 4.5 plus 0.5. How big is the deadweight loss? It's actually a huge deadweight loss because we reduce economic activity from 3 in the market equilibrium to 1. So this triangle here is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4 times 2 is 8 over 2, so the deadweight loss is a solid 4. So compared to the free market equilibrium, how much consumer surplus do consumers win? Well, they don't win anything, so that's 0. So the delta, the change in consumer surplus is still 0. They are not getting any better off. And compared to the free market equilibrium, how much producer surplus do producers lose? Well, they lose a solid 4, and which in this case is exactly equal to the deadweight loss. So it's just a good example to illustrate, why maybe a policy that imposes a very strict price ceiling doesn't do anything to consumers, but only harms the economy in its entirety. Okay, let's go to the next one. Inverse demand function, again 8 minus Q. Two plus Q. But now we have a tax of 2. So we have a new supply function, the supply function with the tax. Maybe make that. So now this shifts up by 2. So we have to basically start at 4, but we have the same slope. Okay, so now here, this is where we need to conduct our welfare analysis. So what is the price after the imposition of the tax? Well, that is 6. The price with tax is 6. What is the quantity demanded? Well, at the price of 6, quantity demanded is 2. Quantity supplied, of course, that's the supply with the tax. So this was the old supply, supply plus tax. So here we need to do our welfare analysis. So quantity supplied is also 2. What's the quantity turned over? Well, the quantity turned over is also 2. So how big are tax revenues? So we turn over 2 units, and each unit carries a tax of 2, so the total tax revenue is 4. How big is consumer surplus? So consumer surplus is, so consumers pay 6, so consumer surplus is, all the aggregate willingness to pay that exceeds the 6. That's this triangle here. So this triangle is 2 times 2, 4 over 2. Consumer surplus is 2. What about producer surplus? So now we got to be careful, because the producers, they don't get 6. So when people pay at the cashier 6, the cashier essentially has to give 2 to the government for every unit sold. So the price that the producers get is only 4. And again, this supply function captures the real reservation price, and the reservation price is again a reflection of the cost. So the producer surplus is this triangle. Which is also 2. And then that means that everything in between here, this square, is total tax revenue, which is 2. So how big is total welfare? And when it comes to total welfare, you have to always remember that total welfare is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus tax revenue, and then later it's also minus subsidy cost, and then also plus social costs minus social cost plus social benefit. But anyhow, so here we have consumer surplus 2, producer surplus 2, and tax revenue 4. So total surplus is 8. So we have again a deadweight loss, and a deadweight loss is a reduction, or is the result of a reduction of economic activity and elimination of mutually beneficial trade exchanges that happened between a quantity of 2 and 3. So this upper little triangle used to be consumer surplus, the lower one producer surplus, but the total deadweight loss is this triangle, which is 1. Okay, so in the next scenario, so we have a subsidy. So demand functions always from 8 to 8. Now the supply function starts at 5 and has a slope of 1/2. So in the market equilibrium, the equilibrium price would be 6 and the equilibrium quantity would be 2. But now we subsidize down the supply, so this here's the supply, but now we subsidize it down by 3, so it starts at 2, still has a slope of 1/2. So this is the supply plus subsidy. Okay, so what is the price after the subsidy? Well, that's obviously 4. So here, this is where the market clears. Equilibrium quantity 4, equilibrium price 4, so the price is 4. What's the quantity demanded at the price of 4? The quantity demanded is 4. What's the quantity supplied? Well, that's also 4. What is the quantity turned over? Well, also 4. How big is this cost of the subsidy? So we have 4 units turned over, and the subsidy per unit is 3. So the total cost of the subsidy is 4 times 3, which is 12. Okay, so how big is consumer surplus? So now it always becomes a little bit difficult to illustrate, but I'll try to. So total consumer surplus is this triangle. Let's make that green again. So consumer surplus, base 4, height 4, 4 times 4, 16, 16 over 2, 8. How big is producer surplus? Okay, so remember, this is the true supply function. Here we have the true cost that matters for the company. So, and even though people at the cashier pay 4, the companies get basically the 4 plus the 3 in subsidy. So this price here is basically the price that the producers get. So therefore, the okay, I better flip that around. So this area here is okay, roughly producer surplus. Let's see if we can make that again light blue. Try to see the overlap. Okay. Okay, that's a little bit. Okay, like this. So this blue area, so how big is this one? So 1, 2, 2 times 4, 8. 8 over 2, 4. So now we said total welfare is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus tax revenue, which we don't have, minus the subsidy cost. And this consumer surplus was 8, producer surplus was 4, tax revenue we don't have, and the cost of the subsidy is 12. So we have no welfare whatsoever. Total surplus is 0. Okay, so now how big is the deadweight loss? And the deadweight loss, first of all, is this area here. So it's this triangle. So this triangle here is 1, 2, 3 in height. 1, 2, base, 2 times 3 over is 6 over 2 is 3. So the deadweight loss is 3. And what that is we have a deadweight loss which is the result of an inefficient overproduction. Why is it an efficient overproduction? Because the supply function and the true supply function is this one here, the upper one. The supply with the subsidy is basically it does not reflect the true cost, the true reservation price that the firms would have to charge normally. But because we make the supply and pretend it's artificially cheaper than it really is, what happens is that there's a bunch of producers and they start serving now consumers whose willingness to pay under normal circumstances is actually much less. So we match people in the market artificially in a way so that people whose willingness to pay is less than what it actually costs to produce are being served, and that can't be efficient. So that is why we have here a deadweight loss, and it's a deadweight loss that results from an inefficient overproduction. Okay, let's stop here and then let's conclude this chapter still with a couple of more multiple choice questions.